In a strange town, a mysterious phenomenon occurred. Dogs suddenly turned into people. Amidst the residents' confusion, a young girl named Saki found herself at the center of this bizarre event. With a heavy heart, a small bag slung over her shoulder, she stood silently outside her house. Her face reflected her anxiety. But after a deep breath, Saki tried to calm herself by remembering that, although the world around her had changed, her beloved dog Ponta was still the same. Mustering all her courage, Saki opened the door and went inside. Her heart pounded with anticipation as she stepped in, and the sight that met her eyes made everything stop. Standing before her was Ponta, but no longer the pet she had adored. He was now a handsome, unfamiliar young man. She looked up at Ponta, now transformed into a young man, her heart filled with confusion. It was hard to believe the scene before her. Ponta, her companion since childhood, who had grown up beside her like a big brother in her eyes, now stood before her as a young man. Despite her confusion, Saki tried to regain her composure, telling herself that she was still Ponta's owner, still holding that role even though he had changed form. With a firm voice, she announced she was home. Her tone steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. When Ponta saw her, his face lit up with joy. He cheered happily, then rushed towards her, arms outstretched, and threw himself into an enthusiastic hug. Despite now being human, Saki was caught off guard by Ponta's joy and excitement, and they both tumbled to the floor in a happy heap. His playful and cheerful nature, no matter his form, hadn't changed at all. As Saki's head spun, she reassured herself that even though Ponta was now human, his essence was still the same. He still radiated the same boisterous energy and affection that she had always loved. To prove it, Saki picked up a ball and threw it. Without a moment's hesitation, Ponta dashed after the ball, playing with it with the same excitement as when he was a dog. Saki wiped her bloody nose, knowing this was all getting to be too much for her. Saki walked through the bustling town with Ponta by her side. Her emotions were a mix of confusion and embarrassment. She felt like something was just wrong, as if people would judge her for walking with someone who looked like an attractive companion, not just a pet dog. But then she told herself that Ponta was still Ponta. Despite his change in appearance, he was still the loyal, mischievous dog she had always cherished. This thought helped her to relax and enjoy the moment with him as they continued their walk. Suddenly, Ponta yanked hard on his belt, trying to undo it. Saki quickly realized what he was doing and panicked. She snapped, her voice high and sharp, reminding Ponta that this was a public place and his actions were inappropriate, even if he was still behaving like a dog. Just then, they ran into Ayane, a well-known girl in the neighborhood with her elegant Afghan hound, Hibari. Ayane greeted Saki, making her wonder why Hibari now looked so beautiful, transformed into a flawless creature. Saki felt a surge of anxiety and sighed, realizing this was Ponta's rival. She remembered their last encounter, believing this time would be a bloodbath. Suddenly, Ponta lunged forward, wrapping his arms around Saki and barking loudly and repeatedly. Surprised, Saki suddenly understood that Ponta's actions were driven by his protective instincts. She tried to stay calm, thinking he was just trying to protect her in his own way. Hibari angrily asked what Ponta's problem was, while Ayane blushed slightly with irritation. Ponta, a bit annoyed, replied that Hibari should go somewhere else. Saki, still in Ponta's arms, also blushed, feeling embarrassed and awkward, but also filled with affection. In her heart, she thought that she was still Ponta's number one. Ponta looked at Hibari and said he hated him just because of the smell of his shampoo. Clearly, Ponta was still very scared and clung tightly to her. His canine instincts mixed with his new human form. That night, as they both lay in bed, Saki felt uncomfortable because Ponta was lying too close, taking up much more space than usual. She sighed, realizing that whether dog or human, animals had a habit of sleeping in the most inconvenient places. As she found herself unable to move, Saki's thoughts drifted back to the days when Ponta was still a dog, to the happy moments they had shared. But now, seeing Ponta sitting on the sofa in his human form, she felt a fleeting sadness. She realized that even though the dogs had become human, their appearances were still dependent on their owners. Saki's phone suddenly buzzed, a message interrupting her thoughts. She glanced at the screen and saw a reminder for Ponta's vaccination appointment. She thought to herself, is it that time again? She knew that even though Ponta was now human, he still needed regular health checks and shots, just like when he was a dog. Deciding to take Ponta for a walk, Saki held one end of the leash, the other looped around his neck. Ponta followed happily, his eyes filled with excitement. However, as they continued walking, Saki noticed Ponta's expression begin to change. He slowed down, seeming to become more hesitant. Saki sensed the shift in his behavior and realized that Ponta had figured out they weren't going on a normal walk. Finally, Ponta stopped completely, refusing to take another step. Saki lured him with a treat, and Ponta reluctantly followed her to the vaccination clinic. His mouth began to water, eagerly anticipating something. However, upon their arrival, Ponta's joy quickly turned to fear. He sat on the ground, his body trembling uncontrollably. Saki tried to comfort him with gentle words and soft pats, but Ponta was too panicked to respond. He looked up at her, his eyes filled with tears, a look pleading for comfort. Saki's heart melted seeing her dog so anxious, and she silently apologized to her own frantic heart. She wished she could make things easier for Ponta, but she knew this was necessary for his health. The doctor called Ponta in, and he sat down, his eyes fixed on the doctor. Saki breathed a sigh of relief when she heard the doctor announce that Ponta was still healthy. But she couldn't help but wonder if treating dogs had become much more difficult, now that they had human-like intelligence and emotions. However, the doctor didn't seem to agree with that thought. With a gentle motion, the doctor gave Ponta the injection. His face contorted in fear as the needle pierced his skin, causing Saki to burst into tears. She thought to herself that this was all for Ponta's own good. Ponta looked at her with a look of betrayal in his eyes. He curled up against her back, trembling with fear and anger, as if to say he hated her for making him go through this pain. Saki's heart broke, feeling pained by what had happened today. Meanwhile, at the office, Ayane sternly rejected the presentation materials one of her employees handed her. Ayane's stern face clearly showed her disappointment as she questioned the employee, asking if he had even checked the document before giving it to her. Her frustrated voice echoed in the quiet room. The employee, shocked and flustered, apologized profusely, but her cold, unforgiving demeanor remained unchanged. She pointed out that this quality of work was unacceptable. Ayane took a deep breath, then declared that she wanted to see the revised version on her desk by morning, leaving no room for argument. After giving her instructions, she grabbed her bag and walked towards her office door. Behind her, the employees whispered, calling her the Iron Lady. Ayane knew some people found her difficult to work with, but she was unfazed, as her high standards were non-negotiable, and she was not sorry for it. At the same time, on the other side of town, a different scene was unfolding. Ponta was hugging a utility pole, his body rigid with fear, while a distraught Saki begged him to come with her. Her chaotic emotions were a stark contrast to Ayane, who entered her home with a determined look. She opened the door and, with sparkling eyes, announced her return. Her pet dog Hibari responded in a cold voice, scolding her for being late and immediately asking about his meal. Ayane rushed to prepare his meal, but Hibari, clearly displeased, grabbed and pulled her hair, showing his distaste for the food she had prepared. Ayane felt a wave of frustration rise up, apologizing in a weak voice, explaining that the food she usually buys was sold out. Hibari, without a hint of sympathy, asked why she hadn't known this beforehand. His voice remained cold and indifferent, which brought Ayane to the verge of tears. She replied, her voice almost a whisper, acknowledging the situation, but inside she felt a growing sense of despair. Hibari, showing no empathy, finished his critique and ordered Ayane to make sure she bought the right food he liked next time. The next day, Ayane sat, a deep sense of frustration in her heart as she reflected on Hibari's cold and selfish attitude. As annoyed as she was, she recognized that he was her responsibility, and she had to meet his needs. Hibari, unchanging in his demands, ordered Ayane to clip his nails. She sighed, accepting the request with a sense of resignation. Carefully, she clipped each nail one by one, all the while thinking about Hibari's dependence on her. Even though he was a dog, he couldn't perform these simple tasks himself. She gently blew into his ear to soothe his anxiety. After she finished clipping his nails, a strange sense of satisfaction began to creep into her heart. Despite Hibari's often demanding and ungrateful attitude, she still felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She couldn't understand why she felt so happy serving such a beautiful yet cranky creature. Taking care of Hibari, though challenging at times, brought her a special kind of joy that she found hard to explain. Hibari thanked her in a cold tone, as if it were nothing special, then remarked what a hardship it must be for her. Just then, her phone rang, shattering the quiet moment. It was a call from work, and the voice on the other end delivered bad news. There was a problem with an order, and if the situation continued, the company would face a disaster. The weight of the call hit her mind like a heavy blow. When the call ended, Ayane stumbled over to the sofa and sat down, her mind spinning with anxiety. She couldn't believe she had made such a serious mistake, and pictured everyone's reactions. Her heart grew heavy with worry and regret. Hibari, observing her distress from the floor, approached her with a look of concern. He lay down in her lap, rested his face on her hand, and looked up at her with a hint of tenderness. This simple yet warm gesture helped to calm the chaotic thoughts in Ayane's mind. Feeling a little more relaxed, she looked at him and, in a soft voice, asked if she could pet him. Hibari lifted his head slightly, responding with a less than enthusiastic demand. "Give me a snack." Ayane, feeling a wave of affection for her demanding pet, promised she would buy him anything he wanted. Saki was enjoying a fun game of frisbee in the park with Ponta. She threw the disc high into the air, and Ponta shot towards it with boundless energy. Each time he caught it, Ponta leaped up with a triumphant look. Saki was filled with joy. However, as the game went on, she started to feel tired from the non-stop play, yet she wanted to extend the fun just a little longer. As the two of them were playing enthusiastically, Saki and Ponta were shouting happily when Ponta accidentally bumped into Uruha, Noriaki's dog, who was sitting nearby with his owner. Saki felt a pang of guilt and quickly apologized for the disturbance. Noriaki, with a gentle smile, told her it was all right, easing Saki's worries. Saki then noticed Uruha, Noriaki's dog, now sitting calmly nearby. Looking at Uruha, a sense of admiration welled up inside her. With his soft fur and relaxed posture, Uruha looked completely at ease, even as a human. His bright, characteristically cheerful smile shone. She couldn't help but notice that Uruha's comfortable posture and happy expression gave him an air of contentment and charm. The contrast between Uruha's tranquility and the energetic game she had just been playing with Ponta surprised Saki. She marveled at how Uruha, despite being so relaxed, still maintained his signature cute smile. It seemed his breed's cheerful spirit remained intact, even in a moment of peace. Meanwhile, Ponta was still engrossed in the game, staring at Uruha, who was watching them with a mischievous glint in his eyes. Saki could feel the tension rising between them. Uruha, sensing Ponta's displeasure, decided to stir things up with a playful grin. He ran over, pounced on Ponta, gave him a little nudge, and encouraged Ponta to play with him. Ponta glared, his eyes filled with frustration and desperation. As he looked at Saki, Ponta whimpered, tears glistening in his eyes, silently pleading with her for help. Saki could only watch as Uruha, still energetic and mischievous, turned his attention to her and yelped with delight. He jumped on Saki, his playful actions making her stumble. Ponta's frustration reached its peak. He scowled and in a sharp tone demanded that Uruha stay away from him. Uruha, unfazed, continued to bother both Ponta and Saki relentlessly. Noriaki pulled on his dog's leash, telling him to leave, which caused Saki to fall to the ground with a thud. The three of them waved goodbye and left. Leaving Saki on the ground, her mind racing, she told herself, I have no regrets in this life. Just as she started to sit up, Ponta, still holding the frisbee in his mouth, approached her with a determined look. He pushed the frisbee towards her, wanting to continue their game. The next day, Saki was hunched over her desk, surrounded by a mess of math books and notes. She was bracing herself for a test she was dreading. She struggled to make sense of the material, her head feeling like it was about to explode. Saki tried to focus on her materials, but as she was trying to grasp the lessons, her box cutter fell off the edge of the desk, landing on the floor with a clatter. Before she could get up to pick it up, Ponta, who was standing nearby, quickly bent down and snatched the cutter with a precise and seemingly purposeful movement. Saki's eyes met Ponta's, and she instantly knew from his mischievous grin that he was up to something. Ponta stood before her, holding the cutter up but just out of her reach. His playful smile made it clear he knew he was causing trouble. Saki came up with a plan. She rummaged through her snack stash and pulled out a piece of bacon. With a wink, Saki offered the snack to Ponta in exchange for the box cutter. Ponta happily accepted and traded the cutter for the bacon, then sat down to enjoy his treat. Saki took back the cutter, sighing in relief, though not without a hint of annoyance. Once Ponta was settled with his snack, she returned to her studies. But before she could feel any sense of accomplishment, Ponta approached her once again. This time, he was carrying the TV remote in his mouth, his eyes twinkling with mischief. He gently nudged Saki, pulling her attention away from her notebook. Saki, already feeling the weight of the distractions, glanced at Ponta with a mix of annoyance and amusement. Although she was trying her best to concentrate, Ponta relentlessly teased her, holding the remote at different angles and waving it around. He gently took her hand, dangling the remote as if challenging her. Saki's patience was starting to wear thin. Determined to regain her focus, she opened a drawer and pulled out a rawhide bone, hoping it would be a tempting enough toy to capture Ponta's attention. She sighed, offering the bone to Ponta as a trade for the remote. Ponta's eyes lit up with excitement as he happily took the bone. As time went on, Saki would occasionally glance at Ponta, who was now sleeping soundly on the floor. His quiet and relaxed demeanor made him seem to blend into the room's stillness, almost invisible in the quiet atmosphere. Saki looked at Ponta's relaxed form, wondering what it would be like if he were always this quiet. It felt as if he wasn't even in the room anymore. Worried that Ponta might get cold from lying on the cool floor for too long, she decided to get a blanket. Carefully, she draped it over him, making sure he would be warm and comfortable. Just as Saki finished, Ponta suddenly shot up, full of energy. He jumped up and playfully collapsed onto her, clearly wanting to turn the moment into a game. Although Saki tried to tell Ponta to stop, reminding him she couldn't play right now, he wouldn't listen. As a result, Saki failed her test. Though pet dogs have become beloved members of human families, their loyalty to their owners remains unchanged. Saki, a student taking supplementary classes because of her struggles with a math test, often found herself overthinking things during the day. One afternoon, on her way home from school, Saki wondered why the extra classes had to run so long, feeling a mix of guilt and frustration as she realized she wouldn't have time to take her dog for a walk. Ponta was at home today, happily playing with his ball, completely unaware of Saki's concerns. As she was on her way home, she suddenly saw a little girl named Lily-chan singing happily, holding the leash of her pet dog, Takeru. The sight brought a smile to Saki's face, and she remembered that Lily and Takeru lived in the mansion on the outskirts of town. With his glossy brown coat and dignified posture, Takeru had the air of a true gentleman, an impressive and charming presence. Intrigued by their bond, Saki decided to secretly follow them, noting how Takeru's appearance perfectly complemented Lily's cheerful and innocent nature. As she quietly trailed behind, Saki wondered if it was really safe for a small child like Lily to be out alone, even with a dog like Takeru by her side. Their connection was evident in every synchronized movement and the joy that radiated from them both. Takeru suddenly stopped, and Lily tugged on his leash, trying to get him to keep moving. However, Takeru stood his ground, his gaze fixed on the traffic light ahead, waiting calmly and patiently for the signal to turn green. Lily understood his intention, smiled cheerfully, and followed him as they crossed the street safely. The scene filled Saki with admiration for Takeru's intelligence and protective nature. It felt like Takeru wasn't just a pet, but a guardian, always watching over Lily with great care and responsibility. As they continued their walk, they came across a stray cat that startled Lily, making the little girl grip Takeru's leash tightly. Without a moment of hesitation, Takeru stepped forward protectively, causing the cat to run away in fear. Lily, initially panicked, looked at Takeru with a gaze that mixed relief and gratitude. However, the excitement from the encounter tired her out, and she began to cry, saying she was too exhausted from the walk. In response, Takeru gently scooped Lily up, carrying her home the rest of the way. This act of care made Lily smile, turning her tears into joy. As she hugged Takeru, Saki reflected on the difference in discipline between dogs like Takeru and Ponta. By the time they arrived back at the mansion, Takeru sat quietly, letting Lily lovingly care for him, calling him a good boy, rewarding him with some treats, and playfully pulling at his cheeks. Their relationship was filled with love and joy. Exhausted after the long day, Lily hugged Takeru tightly and fell asleep beside him, feeling comfort and peace in his presence. Every dog has unique traits that make them special. Hibari believes that dogs transcend their physical forms, connecting deeply with humans. Uruha sees himself as a healer, offering comfort and solace. Takeru values honesty, integrity, and responsibility. Ponta, Saki's dog, is full of energy and enthusiasm, bringing joy and vitality. A girl, captivated by the cuteness of Uruha the Samoyed, couldn't hold back and told Noriaki-kun how incredibly cute he was. She suggested that they should keep Uruha, her heart won over by his adorable appearance. Noriaki agreed, and soon after, Uruha walked over and sat in the girl's lap. However, the atmosphere shifted abruptly as the girl's frustration became apparent. She was upset that Noriaki-kun had to work on his day off, despite promising to spend the entire day with her. She felt hurt and unappreciated, expressing her disappointment that his work always seemed to take priority over their plans. Although he sincerely apologized, the girl's disappointment lingered, creating a tense and stifling space between them. In her frustration, the girl turned her attention to Noriaki. She commented on how he seemed to struggle with expressing his emotions, and that she found it difficult to understand him if he couldn't speak. Her gaze softened as she looked at Uruha, but sadness was still clear on her face as she prepared to leave. She shared her situation with Noriaki-kun, revealing that her new place didn't allow pets. With a mix of sorrow and resignation, she introduced Uruha to his new owner, Noriaki. She gently placed the Samoyed in his lap, her heart heavy with the farewell. With a final pat on Uruha's head, she said her goodbyes and walked away, leaving Uruha with him. Now, in the present, Noriaki was relaxing comfortably on his bed, enjoying a moment of rest. Uruha, ever enthusiastic and full of energy, approached him with his tail wagging happily and a hopeful look in his eyes. In his excitement, Uruha accidentally dripped some drool on Noriaki's face. Startled by the sudden action, Noriaki looked at Uruha and asked, "What are you doing?" Uruha responded with a cheerful wag and an insistent gaze, clearly wanting to go for a walk. Noriaki agreed to take him outside. Uruha, tail wagging with excitement, seemed to understand and eagerly followed him. As they prepared to step outside, the fresh air made Uruha's joy even more apparent. His earlier sadness had completely vanished, replaced by the excitement of a new adventure. As Uruha and Noriaki went for a walk, they came across two girls who were chatting and complimenting how cute Uruha was. Thinking it was playtime, he leaped towards them, dodging Noriaki's attempts to stop him. Soon, Uruha was nestled between the two girls, enjoying their gentle pets and happy pats on the head. A moment later, Noriaki gently scolded Uruha for jumping on strangers, but Uruha cheerfully replied that if the people were happy, then he was happy too. At that moment, Noriaki suddenly remembered his former owner, who once said that if you can't talk, you can never truly be understood. Noriaki looked at Uruha's carefree nature, realizing there was still so much he could learn from his furry friend. Standing there and thinking about Uruha's habit of jumping on people, Noriaki acknowledged that he was still a work in progress. It was then that he spotted a flyer for a dog training class, which filled him with hope. A few days later, Noriaki and Uruha attended the class at the Nakayoshi Pet Center, where they met other pet owners and their dogs. The trainer greeted them warmly and introduced herself, pairing Noriaki and Uruha together. She also reassured Noriaki that Uruha would be in his care. Despite this, Noriaki's anxiety was visible on his face, with small beads of sweat dotting his forehead. Meanwhile, Ponta was lying on the sofa, a serious expression on his face. Saki tried to take a picture of him, thinking he sat like that whenever he was bored. But just as she was thinking that, her phone filled up with photos of Ponta's stern face. Ponta sensed Saki's presence and rushed towards her, and with his irresistible charm, invited her to play. At the same time, Noriaki and Ayane also arrived at the dog training class, bringing Uruha and Hibari with them. Noriaki politely greeted Ayane, saying it was nice to meet her, and that he looked forward to being in her care. She replied with a smile, encouraging him to try his best working with his dog. While they were talking, Uruha excitedly jumped towards Hibari, wanting to play, but Hibari firmly refused, telling Uruha not to touch him. Despite Noriaki's attempts to calm the situation, Uruha continued to tease Hibari. Finally, Hibari caught Uruha and apologized to Ayane, who reassured him that it was nothing serious. Turning to Nakayoshi, Noriaki admitted that Uruha had trouble respecting personal boundaries. Nakayoshi nodded in agreement, affirming that it was definitely a problem. Noriaki then asked Ayane about her training goals for Hibari. Ayane became thoughtful, explaining that she wanted to improve Hibari's obedience out of fear that her own weaknesses might make him unhappy. She also said she hoped to help Hibari become braver, likening it to training from a servant's perspective, which she believed was very similar to training for humans. Noriaki pondered Ayane's goal, wondering if it was a good thing. Just then, Nakayoshi spoke up, explaining that dogs have long lived in packs and communicated with each other, so owners need to establish rules between them and their pets to provide reassurance. Both Noriaki and Ayane listened carefully. Nakayoshi announced that since today was a trial event, they would practice a leader walk exercise. Both of them contemplated the concept. And Nakayoshi-san explained that when walking a dog, they need to walk side by side. If the dog walks ahead, it could indicate that the master-servant relationship isn't firmly established. After the explanation, they began to practice. As Noriaki walked, Uruha, the energetic dog, ran ahead, jumping with excitement. Meanwhile, Noriaki struggled to hold him back from behind, gripping one side of the leash. Hibari pulled even harder, leading Ayane by the leash. She told herself wryly that this path seemed made for her, to walk behind him. She shook her head, feeling tired of the situation. Both Noriaki and Ayane were unsuccessful in the leader walk exercise. The trainer asked Noriaki to give her Uruha's leash so she could demonstrate. She gently commanded Uruha, telling him to follow. And Uruha, with a hint of confusion, seemed to wonder if this was a challenge. However, after just a few seconds, he automatically followed Nakayoshi, walking in perfect, steady steps. Nakayoshi suggested Ayane try something simple, like giving Hibari a treat. Noriaki advised Ayane that she needed to be firmer in her approach, like when speaking to a new employee at a company. Ayane began to imagine, her mind wandering, and she pictured a scene. She was in a formal office, and Hibari, dressed in a business suit with long hair, was handing her documents to be stamped. Nakayoshi reminded them that practice makes perfect and encouraged them both to start practicing the lesson immediately. Both Noriaki and Ayane nodded in agreement and began walking with their dogs. As Ayane walked beside Hibari, she shyly covered her face with her hand. Suddenly, Hibari lunged at Uruha, and Ayane rushed to intervene, apologizing to Noriaki as she tried to pull Hibari away from Uruha. Noriaki watched the chaotic scene, thinking that Hibari had Uruha in a tight hold, like a camel clutch. Watching the chaos between the two dogs, Noriaki told himself this situation was the result of spoiling them too much. Ayane agreed with that thought. She felt grateful to be in the class with Noriaki and hoped he would continue to join in the future, wishing he would be her partner in the lessons to come. Meanwhile, Saki heard about a new cafe in her neighborhood that was supposedly dog-friendly, so she decided to check it out with Ponta. As they sat down, Ponta started whining strangely, and Saki took a sip of water, feeling like something was off. She looked around and noticed the atmosphere in the cafe was like a gala party, with both people and dogs dressed in matching outfits. The sight was so bizarre, it made Saki feel a little uneasy. Saki realized this cafe was completely different from what she had expected and decided to stay on guard. Ponta seemed to have noticed someone, making Saki curious enough to follow his gaze. As she got closer, a car pulled up outside the cafe and she pointed it out to Ponta. The car door opened and a little girl and her dog stepped out. Saki's eyes lit up as she recognized them. It was Lily and Takeru. She thought to herself, "Are they coming to this cafe too?" While Ponta stood beside Saki and held her hand, the driver said goodbye to Lily, telling Takeru to take care of her and promising to pick her up later. Takeru agreed, which surprised Saki. Inside the cafe, Lily saw Saki and waved happily, calling for her to come sit with them, addressing Saki as Oni-chan. Saki agreed, and Ponta seemed delighted, happy about this encounter, which made Saki think that he really must love girls and kids. But when Ponta looked down, he noticed someone staring at him. As he looked up, Ponta saw Takeru watching him intently. Ponta immediately barked at Takeru, who responded with a serious expression as beads of sweat began to form on his forehead. Takeru began to carefully observe Ponta's body, and then he pulled out a chair for Lily to sit down. Ponta thought to himself that at least he had tried. Saki glanced at Ponta, scolding him for barking and telling him to behave. Meanwhile, Lily looked at Ponta with admiration and asked Saki if she could pet the magnificent husky. Saki smiled and agreed. Lily excitedly played with Ponta, cuddling him, which made Saki watch the scene and think to herself that Takeru's reaction was understandable. Since Ponta was just a dog, so there was no reason for her to be jealous. She reassured herself that everything would be fine. However, when Saki glanced at Takeru, she realized he was watching the interaction between Lily and Ponta with a tense look, and a hint of jealousy was clear on his face. Saki, still thinking Takeru was a dog, invited him to play too, but he refused. Before the conversation could go any further, the waiter arrived with their food, apologizing for the delay. Saki admired the dish, praising its exquisite presentation. Lily explained that this was Takeru's favorite dish and tried to give Ponta a piece, wanting him to try it. Takeru became furious watching this, just as Lily was about to feed Ponta. Takeru's anger was about to boil over. Saki noticed Takeru's rage and worried he might lose control and hurt Ponta. To calm the situation, she quickly ordered the same dish from the waiter. Meanwhile, Lily continued to chat cheerfully, completely unaware of the tension, and told Saki that her family moved to Japan for her father's job. As they were getting ready to leave, Lily thanked Saki and said goodbye. Ponta seemed a little scared, hugging Saki from behind as she waved them off. Saki thought to herself that she was glad they could become friends and suggested they visit each other again soon. In the car, Lily rested her head on Takeru's lap, asking if they would always have to be together, expressing her wish to play with Saki and Ponta again. Takeru gently rested his face on Lily's head, holding her in a warm embrace. At that moment, Genzu was looking at a small puppy, unable to contain his curiosity. and asked the young couple standing before him about it. The young man smiled proudly and explained that it was a toy poodle, and a female one at that. Genzu replied that he knew what it was, but he was wondering why it was in his house. The boy explained that his colleague was looking for someone to take care of the dog, so he thought he would bring it home to raise. Genzu thought that was a selfish thing to do. The boy added that after his mother passed away, the shop's business had declined significantly, and although they would help out, he asked if Genzo would be willing to care for the puppy. Genzo looked at the puppy, and its eyes met his, its big, round brown eyes sparkling with innocence. Genzo let out a small smile and gently placed his hand on the puppy's head, telling it not to be too much trouble, calling it a little dummy. From that day on, the little puppy gradually grew into a cute little girl who always demanded her grandpa take her for a walk. Genzu would smile and respond with patience, saying he already knew what she wanted. As they walked together, Genzo couldn't help but think that raising her felt just like raising a child. Their walk happened to cross paths with Ponta, who was out with Saki in her autumn clothes. When they met, Saki greeted them cheerfully. The little girl eagerly told Ponta to lower his head and greet her. Ponta looked down and gently patted the little girl's head. Saki couldn't help but admire how cute she was, and she curiously asked for the girl's name. Genzu explained that she didn't have one yet, as they still hadn't decided on one for her. As they continued their walk, a soft leaf landed on the little girl's nose, making Genzo suddenly remember what his wife had said, that she could love because she had received love, and now it was his turn to pass that love on to those who needed it. The little girl innocently tugged on Genzu's sleeve, holding the leaf in her hand with delight. They kept walking, and before long, the little girl softly suggested to Genzu that it was time to eat. When they got home, the pair walked in, and the boy excitedly announced that he had bought ingredients for dinner and asked if the dog was asleep yet. Genzu corrected him, saying she wasn't a dog, which left the boy confused. Genzu looked lovingly at the little girl sleeping in his arms and decided to name her Kaide. The boy agreed, then invited Genzu to dinner. Meanwhile, Ponta's personality was quite clear. When he was happy, he was alert and playful. But when he was sad, he became quiet and serious. This contrast was understandable, as everyone has their ups and downs in life. At the same time, in an office in town, an employee nervously approached Ayane, apologizing and informing her that he had discovered an error in the proposal. Ayane looked at him with a gentle but firm expression, politely replying that there was nothing more they could do now and suggesting they all work together to fix it next week. The employee was taken aback by Ayane's calm and composed demeanor as she walked away, causing the surrounding colleagues to whisper among themselves that the Iron Lady might have smiled today, but there would surely be a huge storm tomorrow. As Ayane left, one of the employees offered to buy her a drink, but she declined. She thought about her subordinate's mistake, realizing that sometimes rushing can lead to errors, but she didn't let it bother her. At this moment, her thoughts turned to Hibari, and she looked forward to their outing tomorrow, imagining his friendly gestures. Ayane felt happy and excited. Having spent the past 3 months adjusting her schedule just for this occasion, she was determined to protect their little honeymoon, just the two of them. Ayane wondered where they would go, and imagined renting a car to start a long, relaxing trip, enjoying every moment. The next day, Ayane was at home, where Hibari was lying on the floor, his legs kicked up in the air. Suddenly, the news on TV delivered an unexpected report. The typhoon, originally forecast to pass over the Sea of Japan, had changed course and was now heading toward the Kanto region. Ayane's heart sank at the thought of Hibari's hatred for going out in the rain. She dropped to the floor, put her hands on her head, and screamed in frustration. Inside, Ayane felt abandoned by the gods, wondering if they understood what she had gone through to make today special. She silently questioned why the typhoon had to change course, destroying her plans. Just as she was about to give up, a sudden idea flashed in her mind, lifting her spirits. She realized that it wasn't over yet. She could still spend quality time with Hibari. Ayane quickly grabbed a ball and called to Hibari, telling him they could still have fun together. She threw the ball, expecting him to run and bring it back, but she was stunned to see Hibari didn't move an inch. Instead, he looked at her with a lazy expression and asked her to bring the ball to him. Ayane chuckled to herself, realizing that hounds like Hibari were known for their independent personalities and their ability to make their own decisions. In a hilarious role reversal, Hibari threw the ball and Ayane eagerly jumped after it, mimicking a dog's actions. Just then, Ayane's phone rang, interrupting her fun moment with Hibari. She answered the phone, her voice gentle but patient, as she heard her manager's voice, who apologized for bothering her on her day off. He explained that they needed a cost estimate by early next week and asked Ayane to send it by the end of today, apologizing for the inconvenience. At that moment, Hibari's expression turned sad, as if he could sense Ayane's sudden stress. She felt a surge of anger, wondering to herself if he already knew about this. Why didn't he just do it himself? However, she still agreed to send the estimate as soon as possible. As she hung up, Ayane thought to herself that her manager was like an office warrior, always putting work first, no matter what. Her manager thanked her for her help, and Ayane started working on her laptop, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. She had been so looking forward to a special day with Hibari, but now it all seemed impossible. Hibari asked her if they were staying home today, and Ayane, still crying, apologized to him. Suddenly, Hibari stood up, sat down behind her, and hugged her from behind. Ayane was surprised and wondered if he was feeling lonely. Her heart pounded at Hibari's unexpected and affectionate gesture, and she told him that she understood. Hibari gently placed his hand on her head, and Ayane felt she was being so unfair. Hibari didn't normally like doing this, but because he sensed her distress, he had made an exception. Saki woke up in her room, feeling like it was already morning, but she just wanted to sleep a little longer. However, Ponta suddenly appeared and curled up beside her, causing Saki's eyes to fly open. She fell out of bed and onto the floor, annoyed. Ponta, now in his human-like form, sat up in a puppy-like manner, cheerfully greeting her with a good morning. Still sitting on the floor, Saki placed a hand on her chest and returned the good morning. She thought to herself that ever since Ponta became human, these heart-pounding moments had started happening. After taking a deep breath, she walked into the kitchen where her mother was standing and said that Ponta had woken her up. Saki's mother asked her, "Is there anything strange about Ponta waking you up?" And Saki replied that it was very different from what she had ever imagined. Saki's mother reminded her not to expect Ponta to go back to how he was, because no matter what, he was still just a dog. Saki found it strange that a dog had suddenly become human, but her mother told her she had to accept that Ponta was still Ponta, unchanged. Saki couldn't help but notice how attractive Ponta looked now, which surprised her. Her mother joked that when Ponta was a dog, Saki didn't even notice what he looked like. Just then, Ponta rushed over and hugged Saki from behind, asking where she was going. He thought about how much Saki had loved him when he was a dog, and now he compared the change in how she treated him. Saki pushed him away, causing Ponta to fall to the ground. Seeing this, Ponta felt incredibly sad, thinking that she didn't like him anymore. A moment later, Saki sighed as she saw Ponta curled up in a corner of the room, sobbing. She asked her mother about Ponta's behavior, and her mother angrily replied that Saki was avoiding him, because she was the only one Ponta cared about. From Ponta's perspective, Saki was his owner, and he believed she was the one who had changed. Ponta remembered the first time he came to Saki's house when her father asked if she liked him, and she had replied that he was very cute. She remembered how she named him Ponta, inspired by the word pawn from the characters in her own name, and she thought about how happy they were back then. She also remembered the times she hugged Ponta and promised she would always be with him from then on. Saki approached Ponta, sat down next to him, and apologized, telling him that he was like a little brother to her now and a very special part of the family. Hearing this, Ponta was overjoyed, jumping on her and starting to play. Lying beneath him, Saki thought to herself that everything would be all right, even though the ache in her heart remained. Meanwhile, Ponta was happily playing, and Saki apologized to him, saying she couldn't play anymore. A little later, Ponta tried to get his favorite ball, but it was stuck under the sofa. He looked up at Saki with pleading eyes, as if asking for her help. Saki was surprised by Ponta's request, wondering why he was asking her for help when she was the one who got the ball stuck in the first place. She teased him, saying he should be ashamed for getting into a situation like that. Despite her teasing, Saki got the ball and gave it back to Ponta, reminding him to be more careful in the future. Ponta was ecstatic to have his favorite ball back and started playing with it enthusiastically. Meanwhile, Saki couldn't help but think to herself that she was still struggling to understand her own feelings. Saki took Ponta for a walk, and he was busy sniffing around along the way. She asked Ponta how long he planned to keep doing that, suggesting it was time to go home. But Ponta, still busy sniffing, replied that someone had been here, trying to convey that he had picked up an interesting scent. Saki paid it no mind, telling him they were done and that it wasn't a reason to linger. However, Saki's attention was drawn to a pair of shoes on the ground, and she looked up to see Michio from the next class standing there, holding his husky, Shizuku. Shizuku was at his side, and Saki couldn't help but notice the pair. She wondered why she was so beautiful. Saki realized that Michio had a tough Yankee look, while Shizuku was a slender and energetic husky. Just then, Shizuku noticed Ponta and started running towards them, making Michio struggle to control her. The scene was like trying to steer a ship through rough waters, with Michio being dragged behind as Shizuku yanked on the leash. Saki watched as Shizuku charged towards them, while her owner struggled to keep up. As they got close to Ponta, the two dogs greeted each other by putting their paws on one another and started to play, happily romping around together like old friends who hadn't seen each other in ages. Saki couldn't help but think that Shizuku, despite being a husky, had the energy and size of a horse. And even when they were just standing together, they radiated a palpable destructive energy. Saki covered her face, wondering if the entertainment industry could even keep up with their antics. If only they would be quiet. Michio turned to Saki and said, "Hey," Saki replied. Shizuku seems as energetic as ever, with a hint of amusement mixed with exasperation, acknowledging the two dogs' uncontrollable energy. Michio explained that Shizuku is a cheerful girl who's had so much freedom that she's become uncontrollable, and now she's so big she can get away with anything. Saki thought that Shizuku communicated like a country girl, strong and stubborn. She asked Michio if it was okay for Shizuku to just wander around with him, and if she didn't cause a huge mess. Michio said nothing, just smiling as he watched the two dogs play. Ponta and Shizuku continued to play, with Shizuku acting like a pro wrestler. Saki watched as Shizuku used her leg to kick Ponta, sending him tumbling into Michio. When Michio fell to the ground, Shizuku immediately ran to his side, held him close, and asked if he was okay. When he said he was fine, Shizuku gently kicked him in the back, telling him to stand up properly. Meanwhile, Ponta was still swaying back and forth, overly excited from their recent play session. Saki watched the scene and thought to herself that Shizuku had a powerful, almost muscular girl vibe, and that Michio's shyness was the reason things got so chaotic. As they were about to leave, Shizuku said goodbye to Saki, which made her worry if Michio could handle Shizuku's dominant personality. As they walked away, Shizuku held Michio close and said, "You can't just leave me all alone, but don't worry, I'll protect you." Saki kept watching them go, still wondering about Michio's well-being. Meanwhile, in the town of Virua, Norieki returned home to a warm welcome. Takeru, who had been standing inside the house for 2 hours, smiled and greeted Lily. At the same time, Hibari was sprawled out on the floor, exhausted from a long day of activity. Kaide, looking unhappy, called out, asking where her master had been, if they brought anything to eat, and suggested they go for a walk in a different part of the city. Saki was giving Ponta a snack, while Shizuku was still playing energetically in her own house. The scene was filled with the happy sounds of pets and their owners, each with their own unique personalities and habits. Kaide was chewing on her scarf, a habit she'd had since she was little, back when she used to chew on everything. A young boy looked at Kaide with a worried expression and asked loudly what they would do if the scarf got ruined. Kaide looked at the boy with teary eyes. Suddenly, she burst into tears, her small body shaking with sobs. The boy, taken aback by her emotional outburst, became flustered and didn't know how to comfort her. He turned to his father, Genzu, who had just come out of the house with a concerned look, and asked, "What's going on?" The boy held out the scarf, explaining in a trembling voice. Genzo looked at Kaide, his voice softening as he asked, "Was she chewing on this scarf?" Kaide, still crying uncontrollably, nodded and sobbed that the scarf smelled very nice, which was why she was chewing on it. He apologized to Kaide, saying that he hadn't thousand that. Stosam kalkuyan success steiner, one enostal testosterone. Shesu turi nasinas bo sarkinch, are lansani taman brinawo, and he apologized to Kaide, saying that he understood now. Then he turned to his son and told him not to scold Kaide, because she didn't understand what was happening. Genzu reminded his son to remember this and not to get angry over such small things. He pulled Kaide into a hug, and she wrapped her arms around him, her tears slowly stopping as she calmed down in his embrace. The son watched the scene and remarked that Genzu had gotten soft. Genzu's face suddenly fell, his anger rising, and he yelled at his son to shut up, warning him that if he said that again, he'd give him a beating. At Cozy Dog's Cafe, a unique offer is made to customers. Every cup of tea comes with a story. Masuda, the owner and barista, greets everyone with a warm smile. He explains that his cafe was created to offer a peaceful space for dog lovers, a place where they can relax and connect with people who share their passion. Masuda expresses his deep gratitude, realizing that thanks to his customers' support, the cafe has had the chance to welcome many furry friends and their owners. As Masuda continues to share, the customers in the cafe are lost in their own moments of relaxation. Saki sits next to Ponta, stroking her pet, while Genzu is focused on feeding Kaide, his eyes seemingly unable to look away from her adorable face. Nearby, Lily is happily feeding Takaru. And at another table, Ayani feels a sense of peace as Hibari gently places a hand on her shoulder. Masuda continues, describing his cafe as a place where people can find inner peace, surrounded by the love of dogs and the warmth of the community. He was used to the gentle buzz of the cafe, but recently, something had been troubling him. Masuda's gaze fell on a girl and a guy standing near the counter, their conversation seemingly tense. The girl, her eyes red, recounted how she'd just caught her boyfriend cheating on her again. Masuda couldn't help but be surprised as his attention was drawn to a strange sight. His dog, Yamato, had suddenly transformed into a bearded man. Listening intently to the girl's story, Masuda watched, unable to stop thinking about Yamato, his most loyal companion, the dog who had become the most famous mascot his cafe ever had. However, watching the girl talk to Yamato, Masuda couldn't help but think that maybe this dog was more like the ringleader, the real mastermind of this whole thing. The girl continued to pour her heart out, saying she'd always been the serious one in the relationship. But this time, she just couldn't find a way to forgive her boyfriend. Masuda felt a little embarrassed to admit to himself that he'd always been a fan of the calm, all-knowing cafe owner trope in movies, the kind of person everyone comes to for support. As the girl continued to confide in Yamato, she wondered if this relationship was even worth continuing. Yamato listened carefully, then gently placed a hand on the girl's head. Her eyes welled with tears, and she buried her face on the table, whispering that Yamato was probably the only one who truly understood her, calling him Master. Yamato tried to comfort her, but Masuda couldn't help but think to himself, how could Yamato possibly understand the complexities of human relationships? After all, he was just a dog. Just then, Masuda stood up and teased Yamato, saying that if the customers were satisfied with the dog's kindness and natural cuteness, then maybe he wasn't needed anymore. But before Masuda could continue, a delivery boy arrived with a package and asked Yamato what was inside. Curiosity got the better of Yamato, who couldn't hold back and rushed over to the delivery boy, wanting to see inside the package. Masuda tried to tell Yamato to wait a moment. But in his excitement, Yamato didn't notice the size of the delivery cart and crashed right into it. Masuda sat down amidst the broken pieces, lamenting that it was a rare and expensive European tea set. Yamato laughed loudly, apologizing for the accident, and promised to make up for it. But when he tried to help, his actions caused even more things to break, forcing Masuda to tell him to stop. Yamato really is a physical monster, Masuda thought to himself, and his worry was met with a sad look from Yamato. Just then, Saki and Ponta came over to pay, thanking Masuda for the meal, and complimenting the delicious coffee and the new dog menu, which Ponta had thoroughly enjoyed. Before leaving, Ponta hugged Saki from behind, and they said their goodbyes. After they left, Yamato held out his hand toward Masuda with a laugh. Masuda looked at Yamato's hand, thinking it was too strong, and asked what was wrong. Yamato replied that his master was always so cool, and that he was proud to have Masuda as his owner. Masuda's face lit up with happiness. He suggested they go for a walk, then hung up the close sign and they went out together. On New Year's Eve, Uruha and Noriaki were relaxing at home. Noriaki was happily feeding Uruha some beans with a sense of pride, saying that the training sessions had finally paid off. Uruha's eyes lit up with excitement as he asked if he did a good job, and Noriaki replied that he did a great job. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, Noriaki looked at Uruha, snuggled up against him, feeling worried and apologizing for not being able to have a big, lively New Year's celebration. He was afraid Uruha would feel lonely with just the two of them celebrating the New Year together. However, Uruha gently cupped Noriaki's face, softly saying that he wasn't lonely at all because he had Noriaki. Noriaki's heart filled with happiness as he raised his glass and toasted to another year together. Meanwhile, at a New Year's party, Lily sat pouting on a chair, telling Takeru that the party was boring and full of adults. She declared that she wanted to go out and play, but Takeru warned her that it would be dangerous. Lily remained insistent, and Takeru had to remind her that her father had told them not to do anything they shouldn't. However, Lily wasn't backing down. She grabbed Takeru by the collar and looked him straight in the eye. Lily whispered that she knew Takeru wanted to go out too, and with him by her side, she wasn't afraid of anything. The two of them snuck out of the party, disappearing into the New Year's Eve atmosphere. As the old year came to a close, Lily smiled at Takeru, saying that this year had been so much fun, and that she couldn't wait for next year's adventures. Meanwhile, Hibari and Ayane were strolling through the quiet streets on New Year's Eve, surrounded by sparkling Christmas lights. Hibari, dressed in winter clothes, was turning heads with his striking appearance, causing people to murmur in admiration of his beauty, comparing him to a living statue. Ayane walked behind him, gently commenting on the leftover decorations and asking if he thought they were beautiful. Hibari replied calmly, but Ayane couldn't take her eyes off how beautiful he looked under the festive lights. She thanked Hibari for being with her, and Hibari hugged her from behind, sharing some of his warmth to fight off the cold. He suggested they head home, as he was feeling a bit chilly. The two headed home, missing the moment the new year arrived. Meanwhile, Saki sat alone in a dining chair, asking her mother about her father. Her mom replied that he was away on a business trip, just like last year, which made Saki feel a little sad. She gazed at the TV, watching the New Year's Eve celebrations, and imagined a different scenario. Takeru, Ponta, and Hibari formed a successful idol group, along with the neighborhood dogs. She wondered if that was why she'd always been so drawn to them. Just then, Ponta ran in with a ball in his mouth, asking Saki to throw it for him. The sadness in her heart melted away, replaced by a warm smile as she looked at Ponta's joyful face. She placed a hand on his head, saying that whether he was a dog or a person, his happiness was what mattered most to her. In a touching moment, Saki thanked Ponta for always being by her side and promised that they would be together forever.